I'm making this video to really demonstrate why I wanted to restart Obsidian. I can start with how I started using Obsidian and how it became my main note-taking app of choice, and why I've decided to finally start over and start fresh. I started using Obsidian maybe 1 or 2 years ago, and the main reason I started using it was because of the graph view. I didn't use Obsidian because I wanted to take notes. I wanted to use it just for the sake of taking notes so that I could create a massive graph view. And so I created as many links as I could between files. Anything that was remotely connected, I would link together just so I can make a gigantic web. Very quickly, I realized that the purpose of my notes shouldn't be to create that graph, and I quickly dropped that in my first iteration of Obsidian. And so I lasted with that iteration of my Obsidian Vault for maybe 1 week, and I quickly scrapped it and went looking for a new way of using Obsidian. That naturally led me to the Johnny Decimal System and also the para method. Uh, right off the bat, I knew that the para method wasn't going to be for me. I ended up going directly to the Johnny Decimal System and ended up using a modified version of it. My modified version let me have 3 layers of folders, and each layer would have an additional decimal point. And so I would have 3 layers of folders, and this held up well for 1 or 2 years in the Obsidian Vault that I had before swapping to this one. But at some point, that amount of layering and folder structure became too unwieldy, and it became very difficult for me to decide where I should put my folders and files. So there would be files with different topics that would overlap, and I would spend so much time deciding where I should put it. And that led me to really stop taking notes for a while because I would just be worried and overwhelmed with thinking where I'm going to end up placing it and how I'm going to organize those files. And that really goes against what I wanted Obsidian to be. I wanted to be able to jot down anything and everything and just be able to place it in here. And I know that Obsidian has a great search function, but at the same time, I don't want to put everything into one single folder because that would just irk me, and I want some level of organization with my files. And so, after fiddling around with the Johnny Decimal System and using a modified version that I worked up over the past 1 or 2 years, at some point I realized that this wasn't really working for me, and it became really frustrating to take notes. To add on to that, I had installed a bunch of plugins when I first started using Obsidian. I would watch YouTubers and they would recommend plugins to use, and over time I would just keep installing more and more and more, and looking back, the majority of them I did not end up actually using. And this just ended up with a bunch of bloat on my Obsidian Vault, which slowed it down and added to the feeling that I didn't want to use Obsidian anymore. And by this point, my note taking had really drastically decreased. I used to take so many notes, but because of these two reasons, one being the slowness of Obsidian's response time, just because of all the things I had installed, and the folder structure that I had designed and used, I really stopped taking as many notes, and to the point where I barely even opened Obsidian anymore. So that leads me to here and why I restarted Obsidian. Yes, I lose all the files that I had created in the past. Yes, I lose all the work that I had created, but I haven't deleted my old vault. I still have it. I just decided to start over and create a new one from scratch. That isn't to say I wouldn't be taking segments from my old one. For example, my home tab here, my home file, I have taken the formatting and the structure of it from my old vault. So this isn't to say that I would completely neglect and forget about the old vault. I will be still taking segments from there, but I will no longer be using it as my main source of note taking. Anyway, going back, So yes, I used to use the Johnny Decimal System, and the Para method by Tiago Forte just didn't resonate with me, and it didn't work for me. I knew right off the bat it wasn't going to, just because one, I don't have active projects in the same way, so the P would not be relevant for me. Areas I can sort of understand. I do understand that now, but at the time I didn't. I just wanted to have folders for each specific category, and areas just seemed like that, but I would put all my additional folders in there, which would lead to a whole extra layer of folder organization, and it just to me wouldn't look good, and so I forgot about it. I didn't want to have different branches of folders, and having all of that under the umbrella of areas did not seem appealing to me. And resources, yeah, I would have resources, and I think that was one of the biggest things. But again, I had my own way of setting up resources in Archive. I do have Archive, but I don't really use it. I keep all my notes where they are. And if there is something that I no longer use, like I had an old iteration of my home note again in my old vault, then I put that into the archive folder. So really it was a culmination of two things. One, Obsidian got too slow because of all the things I had installed, and two, my folder organization structure just made me really unhappy and I wanted to start that over. And it's really difficult to port my old notes over because of the new folder structure organization. I didn't, and it's impossible to, in my mind, just copy and paste that all into what I have now because they are not really compatible. It's a whole different way of organization and a whole different way of thinking about it. So my old files wouldn't really have a place here. I would want to eventually slowly over time get those notes back, but under the new format and new structure of this vault. So really the biggest things that I learned of my first vault, my second vault, and now this vault is one, be clear the reasons why you want to take notes. Two, there isn't one right way of organizing your vault. You should really be experimenting and working with what works for you. And don't take what other YouTubers say as the right way or other content creators' way of doing something. Yes, they do have the publicity and the support, but you really have to find something that works for you. And it's going to take time, it's not going to be instant. But the important thing is that you find something that really works for you and something that you are happy with, and not to force yourself to align with something that someone else had created. The other product or the other structure that another person might have made will work for them and maybe a whole bunch of other people, but maybe it doesn't work for you. And the only way to know is to try and find out yourself. There's no shortcut to this. So, really, the key takeaway here is really take your own time to explore how you want to organize the files and notes that you're taking, and be careful of what you try to implement. Don't take what other people are saying. You have to take the time yourself to try yourself, because you might end up like me and really just become unhappy with what you've made over the past however many years or months and just end up restarting. And two, really be careful of the things that you are installing in your Obsidian Vault. It's a lot of fun and a lot of excitement to start installing all these plugins, but at the end of the day, if you don't end up using them, all it does is slow down Obsidian and really add bloat. It increases the load time of the application, and I found that the moment I started fresh, Obsidian loads so much quicker, and that makes me so much happier to use this. Having to see the loading workspaces in the past for who knows how long, just I'm so glad that it's gone now, and I'm so glad that I went back to a more minimalistic setup.